Hello and welcome to the 18th monthly meeting of the UK MTB Trail Alliance. In a moment, I will hand over to Bristol Universities and Ride Bristol and many other organisations, Dr. Fiona Spotswood. And Fee will talk us through her research into gender inequality into mountain biking and how it's led to the development of the FIAS, which stands for Fostering Inclusive Action Sport Framework, a tool which any group in mountain biking, including trail associations, can use to help become more relevant and welcoming to women. She will then show us how it's being used by Forestry England and Biker Cymru to develop their activities to support women and girls in mountain biking. So after a Q&A with Fiona, we'll then give everyone a chance to share anything they want help or advice on and benefits from the group experience. But as I've started to do on recent calls, rather than just sort of carry on until I get bored of asking questions, which is what normally happens. We're going to bring this to a sort of a hard halt after 90 minutes, which will be about 25 to 10. So before we start, a bit of housekeeping. If you could use the little hands up icon at the bottom of the screen, if you've got a question, so I know you want to speak, that would be great, and I'll call people in turn. Really importantly, when asking your question, please say who you are and what group you're from. And can I also ask that you please leave your video on during the call so everyone can see each other, so it's a bit more of a social experience. And please change your display name to include your name, your full name, and also the organisation you represent. So, for example, you can see mine is Robin Grant, UK MTB Trail Alliance. And having said that, I will hand over to Fee.
Great, thank you. And I just need to share. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Amazing. So I've got the first slide wrong because it's not just me doing Project FIAS, but this is me. And as Robin said, I'm a prof at the business school in Bristol, which is a kind of strange place for someone to be who's interested in mountain biking. But if I just sort of say that all my research has been about the consumption of sport and physical activity, and most of my career, in fact, has been focused on understanding how people don't do any exercise and physical activity. And it's taken me a long time to get to the point where I'm actually doing research in my own sport. So I am a mountain biker as well. And as Robin mentioned, I'm a trustee of Ride Bristol. I was on the reframing team as well. So I co-organised reframing this year. And I lead a lot of rides in Bristol, including Women Ride Bristol, which is a women-only group that meets once a month. And also I co-lead the Thursday night rides, which are mixed gender. And I also run a kids mountain bike club in Bristol as well, in all my free time, as I like to say. So I'm busy. But this is just a kind of whistle-stop tour of FIAS to give you kind of a bit of an insight into what we do. And also I have a favour to ask as well, which I'll get to later on. So what we do in a nutshell is research, as you'd expect, because we're at university. So we're interested in both the consumption and production sides of mountain bike culture. So essentially how people do it, how people engage with mountain biking and our collective culture, and also what makes that culture, and particularly focusing on marketing and media. We do lots and lots of different types of research, and we use that research to develop. We write loads of academic papers and stuff as well, which I'm sure you've all read. But when we're not doing that, we also we work on producing kind of frameworks and toolkits for different audiences. There's a whole bunch of those. They're all free. And you can download them and use them. And we run workshops that use them and try and embed the different frameworks and toolkits into different organisations. So I'll talk a little bit about that because that sounds a bit vague. I'll explain what I mean by that. But essentially, the point being, we do research, but we want it to make a difference, and we want our insights to kind of change something rather than just fuel the academic publication system. So one of the things we've done is produce a toolkit for developing, supporting, thriving women-only communities in mountain biking. And part of that is workshops for, we run workshops with women who are interested in setting up women-only communities. We've got one, I think, next week, or in a couple of weeks' time at Bike Park Wales, which will be loads of fun, where we help women who have perhaps started a community or want to, and we have a load of resources and ways of thinking about what they're up to in order to make sure that those women-only communities become part of a pathway for women to get stuck into mountain bike culture, rather than just segregate women off and say, you do your own thing, but don't join in the mainstream of mountain bike culture. And we've also got a toolkit on the way called Gearing Up, which is not for us mountain bikers. It's specifically for the people working in brand marketing, so people who are kind of selling mountain bikes and kit, and also for people working in the media. And you'll see a whole load of research and ideas in Project FIAS is around the kind of image of mountain biking. And of course, we all know how important mountain bike magazines are in their digital form, as well as, unfortunately, there's not a huge amount of print magazines. I still get excited when my single track magazine comes through the letterbox. There's not so many of those anymore, but they're still really important for kind of setting that. We call them cultural gatekeepers. They're really important for mountain biking. So that toolkit's targeting those guys. And we run a lot of specific programs with partners as well, which I'll talk about later on, particularly MB Wales and Forestry England, which we'll talk about. So we started out, I won't spend too long talking about the research findings so much. I always say that and then I get carried away. But essentially, we set out right at the beginning of this project, which was in like late 2022, I think it was. Asking, and I asked the question, like, what's it like being a woman in mountain biking? I used to mountain bike a long time ago. I used to race a bit, but I hadn't really been involved for a couple of decades, or maybe not quite a couple of decades, but at least over a decade. Wasn't really involved in the culture, and I thought, how have things progressed? So how do women navigate this culture of mountain biking, which has always been male dominated, as many sports, and particularly action sports? What's it like being a woman in mountain biking, essentially? And as a marketing professor, I was interested in the role of marketing and the media in creating or shaping or changing that culture. And as somebody who's interested in social change, I always ask this third question: it's like, what do we have to do to make things better for gender equality in mountain biking? So I'm not expecting you to read this, but we've done a lot of research over the last 3 years, and it's carrying on. Most of the research has been with women and girls in mountain biking. We've also done a lot of research with teenage girls who don't mountain bike. That's been absolutely fascinating. So teenage girls specifically who are sporty, do other action sports and live near trails, but don't mountain bike. And we've asked them all sorts of questions about what it looks like from the outside, and what appeals or what could appeal or what doesn't appeal. It's been fascinating. We have also done focus groups with women who ride other forms of like leisure cycling, and done a lot of ethnography, so participant observation. I've been watching people for years with purpose, trying to figure out what it's like riding in single gender groups and also in mixed gender groups. And of course, lots of research with marketing and media professionals in there as well. And from that, there's two kind of main bodies of research findings. The first one is about how women navigate this mountain bike culture that we all love. I love it. There's lots of women in mountain biking now, many more than when I first started out in the early 2000s. But it's still a male-dominated and masculine sportscape. And there are pockets of amazing progress, incredible progress. And I want to know what's going on in those moments of those pockets of progress and bottle it and share it. But also there's still patterns of experience that women have, which are sadly shared so often by women who try to come into mountain biking. And pretty much every woman I interviewed gave me fantastic examples of really supportive men riding who they rode with. Pretty much every woman I interviewed had been introduced to mountain biking via a man. But they all shared this experience of discomfort, is probably the kindest way to put it. Not because there were experiences of misogyny and sexism, of course, but not many. It was more a case of just a general sense that women are on their back foot slightly. They're not quite. They struggle to feel legitimate in the culture of mountain biking. And that was a really interesting finding. It's a bit more complicated than that, but essentially that sums it up, that women struggle to feel deeply connected with our sport, and that we need to do proactive things to help women settle in and forge that deep connection. When I talk to industry about this, I always say, ultimately, getting consumers to deeply connect with the thing that you're selling is a great way to make money. So understanding women's relationship with mountain biking is a brilliant business decision. And so my research kind of has identified really where gender inequality is locked into mountain biking, and where there are pockets of progress, and how those pockets of progress work. And so just to start off by saying that we still have around, we think, the data is not entirely clear, but we think around 20% of mountain bikers in the UK are women. Is pretty similar across Europe. There are different places with different stats, but it's anywhere between 5 and 25%. I always go for the upper end. I reckon it's about 20. So, if we're thinking about, I won't talk about this actually, but if we're thinking about what the media and what marketing does to construct a culture of mountain biking, we have to look at what it says. So one of the pieces of research we did was a content analysis. So we took every publication, online publication from Bike Radar and Single Track across 12 months, and we analysed how they present gender. And we purposefully chose Bike Radar and Single Track because they're really different. Obviously, Bike Radar's predominantly a review site, and Single Track is much more varied and much more kind of lifestyle oriented, and also has a woman editor, managing editor. So we looked at how they present mountain bike identities, and there is a kind of established way of seeing mountain bike identities that I didn't come up with. It's from a different academic, and there are 4. There are the recreationalist rider, very chilled, big smiles, nice and relaxed, not technical. Then you've got your competitor, which speaks for itself. Then you've got your risk competitor, which is a bit more kind of downhill. And then you've got your, I can't even say this word, athlete. So kind of combination of, it's basically jumping. So athletic, but also aesthetic, sort of slope style, I guess you'd describe it as. And so we counted, we analysed, and we came up with a bit of analysis, bit of a sort of, a finger in the air to see what was going on. And you can see there is obviously a huge representation of women in there, but it's uneven across the board. There are more men than women, and the women are predominantly in the recreationalist category, whereas men are across all of them. So you already see this kind of hierarchy of gender hierarchy being built into the way mountain biking is being represented in the media. And actually, this is arguably not a representative year that we did it, because this was the year the world champs were in Fort William. And so there was a big commitment from all the media in the UK to cover women's and men's racing in very equal ways. So I suspect that if we did this in a different year, we'd come up with different findings. Anyway, so that's interesting in its own right. What's more interesting is how the women we interviewed responded to the media. And I can go on about these findings for hours and hours and hours, and I won't. All I will say is that women have a really problematic relationship with mountain bike media, which is a real shame. And it's one of the reasons that they feel they often struggle to feel deeply connected with our sport. We cannot underestimate the importance of the mountain bike magazine in all its forms, as I said. Women feel like in our mountain bike media, women are missing, and they are represented in a very narrow way, as is the sport itself. They feel that mountain biking is actually represented in a really narrow way. So basically, you can't be average. You certainly can't be an average woman. And we don't show the full range of different types of mountain biking that you can engage with, and all the different reasons that you might want to engage with. It's like the best kept secret that we have. We as mountain bikers know that actually we're not all riding 80-foot gap jumps across a ravine when we go out in the woods, but we don't tell people that. We show this one very top of the pyramid kind of image of the sport. And so, women have, told us all these different ways that they love mountain biking. They love the flow, the fear, the freedom, the achievement, the challenge, the progression. Also use mountain biking as a form of mental coping for mental health. So nothing a man wouldn't say, right? This is not gender. This is just all the lovely ways that we all love mountain biking absolutely came out of the data. But when you ask them about the media, they feel really disengaged from mountain bike culture. They talk about there's no women in those magazines. Well, that's not true, but that's what they said. That's what they feel. They talked about, you know, the importance of role models as they were growing up. So the data collection for this part of the research was me going for a ride with a woman who mountain bikes, and then after the ride interviewing them about their relationship with mountain bike culture and how they engage with the media. So that's important because so they are mountain bikers. So, women were telling me that they were growing up thinking, well, mountain biking was definitely off the table. It was a complete accident that I took it up. I knew there were no other women there. There were no other women in mountain biking. I couldn't see them. They weren't anywhere. And they struggled to form this legitimate connection. There was a lot, pretty much every woman I interviewed said at some point, I feel like a bit of a wally. I'm paraphrasing. I look ridiculous. Am I allowed to be scared? I just feel like I'm not riding properly. I'm not a proper mountain biker. And I did ask every woman I interviewed whether they were a proper mountain biker. This because I'd been for a ride with them and their bikes were propped up against a tree as I was interviewing them. And so many of them kind of apologized for not being a proper mountain biker, not a rad one. So these images that we create in the media are really important. So they felt really disengaged. They felt really frustrated that the only way they could access mountain biking was through a male friend or a male partner, and it shouldn't have to be that way. There was a real sense of that. And for some women, that sort of habituates as this kind of disengagement. They never quite give themselves to mountain biking. I mean, this is my true love. I've been mountain biking a long time. I will never stop. You have to drag me off the trails. I adore it, but I could see there was some of the women, there was just a sense of it's really their husband's thing. It's not properly their thing. But others, there was a real anger. There was a real sense of rejection. I don't want this mountain bike scene. I know what it is. I can describe it to you. It's big groups of lads, and I've got no interest in joining it. And so there was particularly with the younger women, there was a real anger and a real rejection of what they perceive as contemporary modern mountain bike culture. Now, a lot of this is quite interesting because their critique of marketing and media, so the representation of mountain biking, is that when women are included, it lacks authenticity, it's tokenistic, it's really including women for a male audience, it sexualizes women and it trivializes them. Now, we didn't actually find any images that sexualize women or even trivialize them. And it's difficult to say whether it was these, any articles we found that were kind of about women or included women were for a male audience, but we didn't find the level of perceived sort of gender injustice that the women we interviewed felt really strongly. We had a lot of comments like this. They haven't determined that's what women are interested in. Who asked them what they wanted? And I know a lot of people who work in the media, and they really do. They try incredibly hard. They are trying to change the representation of women. But there is this cultural lag. A lot of the comments we received about the marketing and media referred to the Marzocchi girls. And for anyone who's been around a while, the Marzocchi girls were used to advertise Marzocchi forks, but quite a long time ago, really in the 90s. They haven't been around quite a long time, but this was the cultural lag. And it's like women have written off marketing and media as not part of their experience in mountain biking, which causes problems for how we bring them in and draw them in. Because, of course, deep engagement with mountain biking as a kind of consumer means that women are spending money, they're volunteering, they're taking part in dig days, they're getting stuck into all aspects of the sport, they're training as ride leaders, and they're becoming, coaches and mentors and working in the industry. And so there's a lot of other things that spin off from this problem of lack of engagement with mountain bike culture. Now, final point is that it wasn't all bad. So women are avid consumers of mountain bike media, definitely. They just don't read what we would describe as the kind of mainstream mountain bike magazines, websites, brands and so on. They hunt out interesting stories. They shout about what's going on. They share avidly. There was a lot of media consumption. It just wasn't, it was very different to what men tend to read and follow. And it was really important to women that they found the interesting stories and interesting blogs. And it has a particularly important purpose as well, which is connecting women together. And this is something that has taken off enormously, particularly during lockdown, I think. There was this rise in gravel gangs, as they were called. Gravel off-road riding communities, women-only communities. They were really started as a way of combating social isolation. Mountain biking's grabbed hold of this idea, by the scruff of its neck, and women are, forming, mushrooming everywhere, women-only communities, and they're so important for mountain biking, as I'll talk about. And I've interviewed a lot of women who started women-only communities, and there's a lot of things that those communities do. It creates a safe space. It obviously creates visibility as well. It creates a pathway into the sport. It eradicates that feeling of discomfort that so many women have when they join, however supportive a group of largely male-dominated group, it sets out to be. It's really intimidating for women to join that space. And so women-only spaces, events, rides, weekends, festivals have become such an important part of mountain bike culture. And I'd extend that as well to dig days, training, anything. I think it's an incredibly important incredibly important part of a future, more inclusive sport if it's done right. I won't talk about this slide too much, but essentially what we've done in Project FIAS is map what we call the practice ecosystem in mountain biking and identified where gender inequality is locked in and where gender progress is possible. So there's like the bottom ones are practices that stifle gender equality, and the ones at the top are moving towards their transformative. And we turned all of that insight into this framework. And this framework is what we use as the basis for workshops with organisations ranging from British Cycling. We've run the FIAS framework workshop with British Cycling, Beicio, Cymru, Forestry England, big organisations, national organisations. But also we're developing a version of it for trail groups as well. And it identifies, through research, it's all underpinned by our research, that there are essentially 4 parts to fostering an inclusive mountain biking, and that groups should strategize and use this to underpin their actions around these 4 areas, and this will lead to progress in mountain biking. So at the heart, unsurprisingly, is building mountain bike community for women, stable, visible, supported, growing communities of women mountain bikers. We use the word women plus to denote women and marginalised genders, but I just can't say it every single time. But I should have been really clear that when I say women, I mean women plus, and that means women and marginalised genders. At the top, you've got integration of women into mountain biking, and that is a very purposeful, it's at the top for a reason, and it's all about activities that are needed to integrate, to support women to join stuff that's already happening in mountain biking, whether that's trail associations, whether that's races, whether that's events, but they might feel like they're really inclusive and open. And I have race organisers say to me all the time, well, women can enter if they want, without any understanding of women's experiences in those spaces. So integration is proactive action to ensure women can join what are purportedly mixed gender mountain bike experiences. Then you've got diversifying mountain bike leadership. We know, I don't need to tell you guys, but diverse leadership leads to different decision making. It's good for everybody, and that leadership can be, around the boardroom table. It can be or it can be, ride leaders or trail group leaders, trail dig leaders, any form of leadership. Gender diversity will change the decisions that are made, the atmosphere, the culture, and encourage women to move from their women-only community into different parts of mountain biking. And then the final bottom left is fairly obvious, transforming the cultural representation of mountain biking. And we started big, so we started with major national policy organisations. We also work with the International Mountain Bike Association as well. But this is the same. Everyone has a voice. So trail groups have a voice, races, events, your local, community ride that you pop on Facebook has a voice and has an image. And so transforming the cultural representation of mountain biking can be done by everybody. It's not just the role of single track and bike radar. So the framework is not just this. It's got a whole load of activities and actions, and it's freely downloadable from the Bristol University site, so I can share that. And there's also a toolkit, which I mentioned at the beginning, which supports women-only communities. And as I said, we run workshops that help communities who want to set up a group for women, whether that's a trail group who has a mixed ride and wants to set up a women-only ride. We have a bunch of resources that can help do that. And then we run these strategy development workshops where we use the FIAS framework to underpin and shape what groups do, what organizations do. As I said, we started big with these big organizations, but this is my favor, is that we would like to work with smaller organizations as well. So if you are part of a trail group and are keen to have a conversation about how you could shift and shape your activities and strategy, if you have one, around gender inclusivity, then give me a shout, because this is exactly something that we want to move into in the future. I'll finish up now with just a few examples of where we are embedding the FIAS framework in kind of larger projects in partnership with organisations. So that we've worked with, we get phone calls where people ring us up and say, oh, we are the Luxembourg Ministry of the Economy. Please can you come out to Luxembourg and tell us how we can use marketing to create an inclusive culture of mountain biking in the country? And these are amazing experiences. So we use the FIAS framework in a whole load of different ways. And that was great. We've also worked with Beicio Cymru, and I have a kind of member of staff, a policy fellow called Maria, who's working with Beicio Cymru on the MB Wales project, which some of you will be familiar with. We also are working in Germany and in Europe, in France, really, with the European Network of Outdoor Sports. But I'm going to talk about Beicio Cymru first of all, and the Forestry England pilot as well. So you'll see, you may be familiar with MB Wales and the things we're doing, but some of those activities from MB Wales are kind of energized by FIAS and the FIAS framework. And we've been really lucky to have an amazing group of regional champions who are supporting our work, some of whom are on the call. But we have 5 events set up for the community of practice in Wales. And really what they're all about is shaping action and activity and visibility of women as part of mountain bike culture in Wales. And they've been organised around different parts of the FIAS framework. So we've used the FIAS framework to decide what to do. So, for example, demystifying ride leadership is encouraging women to get stuck into ride leadership. And we're also offering free training as well as part of that. And then we've got our community building workshop. And then a really fun one, I'm looking forward to this, an inclusive events discussion, where women are going to come together online to talk about what they want in races and events, and what would, coming up with basically a manifesto for inclusive mountain bike events. And hopefully we'll be in a position to share those ideas with race organisers and develop something kind of regionally that events organisers can commit to. That's the plan. And then you may be familiar with the Forestry England work, particularly in the form of the Women's Takeover Day. This is just one part of the kind of strategy that we're developing with the Cycle Centre over in the Forest of Dean. There'll be lots of things. We're also going to offer ride leadership training. There's the Hope Women's Enduros coming to the Forest of Dean. We're organising this big Women's Takeover Day. There'll also be a social media marketing campaign to raise the profile of women mountain bikers in the forest. And we're going to develop different partnerships with brands and so on through our work there. And this again is being driven by an amazing steering group of women who live and ride in the forest and are co-creating all the activities that we're doing. That's it. So next, And what we're doing is, as I mentioned, we want to expand into working more closely with grassroots organisations. Probably should start with Ride Bristol, given that I'm a trustee. I will do that. And also we are expanding the FIAS work beyond mountain biking to other action sports. So one of our original steering group members is actually a kite surfer, and she's used the FIAS framework to develop a lot of her activities in her kite surfing community that she runs. And so we are looking to see the relevance and the possibilities for extending some of our actions beyond mountain biking, believe it or not. And as I mentioned, we are working with Germany and France, and we've already worked with Luxembourg, so we're expanding into Europe. So I've gone over slightly, but not too bad. So that's the end from me, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Cool, thank you, Fee.
No problem.
So yeah, as normal, I'll encourage everyone to think about their questions, and I will kick off. I've got loads of notes. Where should I start? So going back to the beginning, I mean, you sort of reckon that about 20% of mountain bikers in the UK, but you gave a range of 5 to 20%, 5 to 25% across Europe.
Yeah.
Like, have you got a feel for like which countries are sort of doing really well and which countries are doing really badly?
No. It's not a simple answer. It's there is no data. It's amazing. So in Germany, they've got this amazing thing called the German Mountain Bike Monitor, and they do a national survey. And I would love to do this in the UK if we could ever find some funding. But every year they do a really big survey of mountain bikers. And they ask all sorts of questions, including like where they go on holiday, where they ride, what kind of riding, who they take with them, how much money they spend. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's used to develop strategy and get money funding in Germany, and it's kind of managed by the organisation we work with there, and it's brilliant. So we don't have that in the UK. So the data is actually pretty ropey. We've got media engagement data, brand engagement data. There was an academic survey done in 2018, and I think that's the last one, and that said 20%. Pink Bike did a survey that said 95% of mountain bikers are men. The trouble is with surveys, and a lot of my data talks about women's lack of engagement, or they're less deeply engaged. So if you receive an email from an organisation like Pink Bike saying fill out this survey, if you're a mountain biker, women are just less likely to fill it out. So it's really difficult to get good quality data. It doesn't. So I think I go with 20%, because I don't believe only 5% of mountain bikers are women. I think it just doesn't sound right. And based on, there's a few other sources that we found that say about 20%. And so I don't think it's national. I think it's regional. When there is proactive effort to make women feel included and put on particular activities and think strategically about how to encourage women to feel like they're part of mountain bike culture, they will ride. And so it's not about national, it's about regional and local effort, which is one of the reasons we wanted to work with Forestry England right from the beginning, because you can do things on a really local level and then see the effects of them.
Cool. I'm interested. Was it Dimbin? Not Dimbins.
Yeah.
Developing Dim, or something, isn't it? The German sort of mountain bike federation that runs that survey.
It's kind of managed by what are they called? I've got a real problem remembering the name. They're called Mountain Bike Tourism Deutschland, something like that. Tourismus Forum Deutschland. Yeah.
Okay. And out of interest, do you remember what proportion of those the German survey respondents are women?
It's about 11%.
Right. Okay.
Which again, it doesn't rep, but it's a survey. This is why I do qualitative research. It doesn't represent. That it's probably more than that.
Right. So we have no reliable quantitative data, basically.
No.
Which is okay. Well, that leads me on to my next question. You talked about this a bit, but how do you think it compares to gravel, for example?
So gravel's fascinating. And I asked questions about gravel culture, particularly when I interviewed the marketing and media professionals. So gravel culture, gravel biking has been around forever. Like, I rode, that is just mountain biking in the 90s, right? It's just, but gravel culture is market mediated, as is mountain bike culture. So we know what to do, and we know what it feels like without theorizing it too much. But like we know kind of the atmospheres and how it should feel and what we should look like because of marketing and media. They tell us essentially what the parameters of the sport are. So gravel riding, just like mountain biking, was created in adverts and in magazines and in branding and in ambassadors. That's what created it. So it's really new as a concept, and it's been created at a really different point in history. We're much more, mountain biking was developed as a market mediated enterprise in the 80s, and you can tell you can tell that it was all big masculine macho characters, loads of fun, kind of Top Gear-esque caricatures almost. And gravel riding is invented now, where we're much more well, pre-Trump, of course, but we're much more aware of diversity and inclusion. And it's been carefully done. Gravel events and brands that support gravel or get behind gravel think really carefully about how to create a culture of inclusion. And I really like that. It's really, really interesting case. So yeah, I'll leave it there. I'm sure you've got more questions.
Well, I don't know. Well, just, I mean, so do you have a guesstimate for what percentage of gravel riders in the UK are women?
No, but I don't, because there is, to my knowledge, no data. You'd have to do the same sort of crazy dance that we've done with mountain biking, where you probably pick the leading brands and find out the engagement and bike sales and then events data and kind of figure it all out.
Yeah, I wonder if we could speak to the Bicycle Association, who are the trade body for bike manufacturers in the UK, and see if, because they've got pretty impressive sales data. Whether they break that down by gender or not,
they don't.
Right. Okay.
No, it's really that most brands. I know this very well because it's one of the data sets we've been chasing for 2 years now. But there's very, very little gender retail data. I think Canyon has gender split data. Trek does, but only in retail stores and only if the salesperson puts it into the till, which is really interesting. Actually, it's a total anecdote, but women sales staff tend to put in the gender and men don't. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
There's a lot because it's so conscious. They're so conscious of it. But actually, it's really, really challenging. We've got some proxy data, so we've got some data about from Komoot of how many men and women sign up to events and training and trips and stuff. But it's really difficult to find retail data and bike sales by gender. They just don't keep it.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, it does feel like gravel is a much more gender balanced part of cycling than mountain biking is, doesn't it? I mean, certainly in terms of looking at rides or events about gravel, there seem to be a lot more women in the room or on the rides than there are mountain biking.
And I think it's really important to recognise that that's been done very proactively. It's not an accident. It's been done incredibly proactively by people with real insight into not wanting to make the same mistakes that we've made in mountain biking and to a large extent in road cycling as well.
Yeah. Road cycling is probably not any. Well, I don't know. Do you have any insight into that? Is road biking better or worse than mountain biking?
So my collaborator Martin is a roadie, and his speciality is French road cycling history. So I wish he was here. He knows everything about the Tour de France and the birth of road cycling and how it came to Britain and everything. But it's very similar. It's very similar. It's very male dominated and kind of masculinist in some forms. Obviously, there are again pockets of real progress which are wonderful, and you need to understand those in order to take the bits that work and apply them elsewhere. I think what's interesting about gravel is one of the interviews I did with he was a global marketing director for a major bike brand, and I interviewed him, and it was very interesting. So without giving too much away, we were talking about what it's like being somebody who's interested in gender progress in an big organization, a marketing organization, and whether that's easy, and whether you can recognize it and what you can do to ensure that when you spend your marketing pounds, you make sure that you're representing mountain biking in a way that helps gender equality rather than hinders it, or at least stagnates it. And one of the things he said to me really struck me. He said their brand had been realigned. So, they do these very expensive brand repositioning activities. And before he'd started, actually, he said we did this really, really good repositioning activity, and it was all about gravel culture. So we were learning about gravel culture in order to apply those insights to our mountain bike marketing strategy. And because we did that, it's therefore really inclusive. And now he never has to fight when he says, hey, maybe we should put a woman in this advert, or maybe we should get a woman to review this new bike we've just launched. There's never a pushback, because the whole brand is aligned around kind of these inclusive values that they took from gravel culture. So I thought that was, it says it all, really, doesn't it? I thought that was really interesting.
Everyone else, don't forget you're meant to be asking questions if you have any, but I will, in the meantime, carry on. So, I mean, you talked about women being avid consumers of media, but not traditional mountain bike media. So there's a challenge to that. I mean, isn't that just representative of, how times have changed for everybody, not just women?
Yeah, and obviously my data is qualitative, so it's not representative and doesn't pretend to be. But I have talked to a lot of people, and what I tend to see is that men who mountain bike and for whom mountain biking is a big part of their life. Like, it used to be called a lifestyle sport. We don't use that phrase now, but I don't know why. It's great. It is a lifestyle. People fall in love with mountain biking and find it very difficult to fall out of love with it. And the men that I talk to tend to, read the headlines pretty much every day. There'll be single track pink bike, bike radar. There'll be a kind of, flick through, there'll be the feed, and they'll just read it. And that's just part of how they keep up with the technology and what's being released, and, whatever else techno fetishist stuff blokes get interested in. And women just don't feel connected to that at all. And so it's very tempting to kind of give up. But I found it fascinating that when you dig a little deeper, once they'd finished telling me that no women read those magazines, they did actually tell me that normally it was, oh, but I do like single track. Single track's different. They're beautiful. Oh, I can see Hannah's there. I'm not sucking up, Hannah, I promise. I love the photography. The stories are amazing. I really like the writing. So there was I don't buy it, but my husband buys it and I'll read it. I do like it. And then there was also, and I follow this blog, and I really like these people on Facebook, and I do follow these people on Instagram. So there was a real media landscape that was curated. It was just not the same. It was just not the same, and it wasn't really engaging with what we would call the mainstream. And that's important, I think.
Yeah, and again, and that does, that rings true with my personal and my experience with other male friends in mountain biking. I suppose though, where I was leading to with that is, if there is this sort of change in media consumption patterns towards sort of social media and towards, I mean, if you look at it in just culture in general and politics, women and men consuming very different types of media.
Yeah.
How do we deal with the problem in that scenario?
It's really problematic, and we go into this in the academic paper we wrote, because obviously then it's algorithm bias, and I interviewed some women at different points, who, not for this part of the project, but who said, I think there's loads of women in mountain biking. I don't really get what the problem is. But of course, if you are a woman who mountain bikes, your feed is then full of women who mountain bike. And you don't, and then you're a man who mountain bikes, and your feed is full of men who mountain bike, but never the twain shall meet. So there's very little integration. And so the role of the kind of the broader media to pull those links and actually be progressive is really, really vital. So I always think about social media as being a reflection of existing kind of societal inequalities, imbalances, whatever, And the media has this, you know, the other media has this opportunity to be progressive, which it can either take or it can't. So you've got a kind of continuum between media reflecting and media as molding. And one of the things that we said in our paper was, you know, there's definitely been progress, but there are also a lot of missed opportunities.
I suppose, you know, regardless of where their content appears, brands are a constant factor in funding the production of that media.
Almost all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I suppose again, I mean, like, and again, I don't have the answer to this question. Like, but you know, shred it to sell, right? Which is why they produce them.
Yeah.
How do we get around that? Like you know, and don't get me wrong, like you know, shredits are problematic in lots of different ways. They're problematic in presenting, you know, this male-dominated action sport, you know, adrenaline-fueled vision of mountain biking, but they're also problematic in terms of, you know, irresponsible trail riding and you know, and lots of other ways.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, and I don't have the answer to the question, but you know, perhaps that's a wider discussion for everyone in this call. But yeah, I don't know, you know, like if it's there's that basic link between, you know, if we produce this video, which is actually, let's face it, quite cheap to produce, it'll help us sell bikes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there are some really quite challenging stark financial realities that the bike industry has faced or is continuing to face, which you have to set against this. For me, you know, I think I think it's about variety and diversity rather than banning the shred it. You know, I think everyone loves to see someone amazing riding a bike in an amazing way that you could never possibly do, and making it do things you didn't know were possible. You know, of course we do. But it's also about recognizing that at the moment there is a missed opportunity in engaging with different groups of actual or potential, to use a horrible marketing phrase, but actual or potential customers who are not engaging with the media content that we're putting out there about our sport. And if we want to create an environment where, you know, our children grow up and think, oh, that looks like a bloody good sport to try, I'm going to give that a go because I've seen it and I stumbled across a video, or I saw an image and it made me just think, God, that looks wonderful, and I'm going to try it. And I happen to be a mixed race or a person of color or you know, a woman, a girl, you know, then we're winning. And so I think one of the things that we kept coming back to when we were trying to make sense of all the data was it's about narrowness. We only give a very narrow presentation, and you talk to mountain bikers and they've stumbled into this sport and they often, as I say, get hooked. And we do it for life. We're lifers. No one rides like that, you know. So we know it, but it's a best kept secret. We don't tell anyone else. And the thing about action sports like mountain biking is that you don't see it anywhere else. You don't pick up the Guardian or turn on the BBC. It's not there. So the only place it features is in our own media. And so we've got a disproportionate responsibility / opportunity to shape the narrative. And it's really challenging. I mean, there are really good examples of where this is happening in both media, on the media and the marketing side. You know, Kotick, a really good example of not so much on, well, they do actually lots of things, but for gender, I was just saying not so much for gender diversity, but that's not fair. But the example I'm thinking of is in relation to sustainability. So Kotick often say, you know, we'd make loads more money if we made carbon bikes, but these are all the reasons that we don't. And so they're doing a form of progressive, transformative marketing, and they're aligning their brand with something that they believe in. And I think there's lots of other brands and lots of other, you know, media outlets that do the same thing. But I think we could see more of that rather than a kind of, well, this is how we've always done it, so let's carry on. And one more thing, before I get off my soapbox, but I talk to a lot of men who also tell me that they feel really disengaged with this sort of this masculinist ethos of mountain biking, and they, you know, and they say, well, how, you know, and all the kind of the things we write and say about kind of inclusive sport and what that means and how it feels, they're like, oh, I want to ride with you guys. This is this is much better. So this is not actually just about women. It's feminism in its truest sense of the word, which is open for anyone.
Yeah. you've segued nicely into my next question. But again, a reminder for other people to chip in if you have any comments. But before I move on to that, actually, just a practical thing. So one of the things you talked about was you're putting a toolkit together for media and brands. Can you talk a bit more about that?
I'm going to launch it at the Summit Series conference for women in the cycling industry in September. I said it. I know I've got to finish it now. But it's based on, it's going to be a toolkit for marketing and media. It's supported by a really impressive steering group of really incredibly experienced experts who work in mountain bike marketing and media, who've given their insights, and it's going to be a toolkit for action. So little actions that you can do if you work in brand marketing or in media to make different sets of actions, different sets of decisions that can chip forward and chip away at gender inequality in the representation of mountain biking. And it's based on a part of the research where we interviewed a lot of these amazing professionals, and self-selecting, of course, because no one who was not up for gender progress came forward and said, I want to be interviewed. So mostly I interviewed really progressive people, and a lot of the time they were in organizations that really cared about gender and gender equality. 3 of the people I interviewed were in the same organization in different parts of Europe. So they may have known each other, but they didn't work together. And they all use the same language. As she said, it's natural. It's built into what we do, which was really interesting. But there were also other people who were just exasperated. And this is one of the quotes was somebody said to me, it's like shouting into the void. And I always remember that, because it's like I'm trying to point out to the people I work with that there are opportunities for change. We never show women in the pictures, and if we do, they're standing next to their bike, they're not riding it, or they're behind the bloke, or that they're a tiny image, or we just don't have them because we don't. And then the answer is we don't know any women who ride bikes. It's like So you have they can see it, men and women. This was not particularly gendered, but they can't do anything about it. So the toolkit will enable them to engage their organisation in a conversation about gender progress.
Cool.
And it's coming soon.
And then how do we take that conversation to more modern forms of media, or more like influencers, for example? Individual athletes and individual YouTubers. Have you got a plan for them?
I haven't, and I know we talked about this in passing in the past, and it is quite a different ecosystem. Influencers were mentioned, and brand ambassadors were mentioned a lot in the research. There is a genuine frustration, and I don't know what the word is, but it's close to frustration by women ambassadors who sexualize themselves in order to gain followers. But there's also an absolute understanding about why that happens. So, if you're a woman who's, a handy mountain biker, or you've got there's a reason why you're, sponsored by different brands. And, you need to justify your existence to get paid, to get your free bike or whatever. And so it's and that predominantly, 80% of mountain bikers are men. And that there's a real heteronormative masculine culture of mountain biking. So it's a good way of doing it. It's a strategy. It's to sexualize yourself, and then to, in order to gain followers and make your brand happy. It's problematic for gender progress in mountain biking to do that. So there is a real sense of frustration amongst women about women who do that, but also an absolute understanding. And it's really challenging. So he's got a hand raised.
Yeah, go on, Zoe.
Hiya. No, I was just going to say it's really interesting because my daughter is 16, is sponsored, and she is so aware of that. Like, she sees the slightly older women. She sees when they do certain angled posts of their behind, but she also sees the trolls and the comments that people like Cara get. And she will go and comment on those. And I think what's really interesting, and there are some brands, and I particularly know of a couple who work in marketing who are watching and seeing who comments on those things, and they will not then sponsor those people. And I think it's something that's really interesting. It happened at an event we were at recently. Some lads went up to the booth and were like, right, I want you to sponsor me. And it was like, whoa, that's not how it works, mate. It's not as simple as being good on a bike. And but I'm better than Cara Beale. Why aren't I sponsored? And he did an amazing job on Instagram of putting a bit of a post together about, look, if you want to be sponsored, this is what you need to bear in mind, that brands are watching. Some brands are looking for people that are going to be good ambassadors, that aren't dicks, that aren't going and commenting on Cara Beale and saying you can't jump and pulling girls apart or men. But the brands are watching, and I think it's really valuable with the toolkits that you're putting together, based on our work with Project FIAS and the toolkit we did that around the marketing, because I think it's really hard if you have no clue, where do you start? And it can seem such a big thing. And every time I listen to you talk, I'm just like, oh my God, we've just got so much more to do and we're not doing enough. And then you can just feel like you need to bury your head in the sand and go, I can't do anything. It's just never going to change. But coming back to all those baby steps, and every little thing does make a difference. And we were at a race 2 weekends ago. 6% of entrants were women. There were 3 women's categories versus, I didn't even count how many men's categories because there were so many. The girls were all lumped together, but it's not on people's radars. Brendan Fairclough said to me, oh, what category is May in? I'm like, no, it's not juveniles, not youth. It's just 13 to 18. It's just the girls. And I had lots of conversations, because I will always talk about this when I'm at races, because I marshal and I talk to people, and because you've just got to raise that awareness, because he had no clue, because he's never had to look at the girls' categories. And it's the same for the organisers. Like, they don't need to make it more inclusive because they're selling out anyway. But actually it's chicken and egg. There were 3 women's categories. It was girls 13 to 18, it was 19 plus women, and then it was elite. So if I'm a 46-year-old woman, I'm going to be in the category with the 19-year-old girls. And is that motivating to me to want to spend my very hard-earned money doing that? Along with all the other side of women typically earn less money and have less free time and all of that stuff. But notwithstanding the fact that you've got 6% of these entrants at this race out of 330 people, you're standing in the uplift queue, you're waiting to drop in. It is surrounded by men, and there's no consideration of how intimidating that may feel. And the conversations and the language that goes on, and they don't necessarily even notice that it's a girl or a woman.
I mean, I think events are really, really interesting, but I think you've touched on a few really important things there. One is invisibility, and this is what we come up across a lot in our work. And I think it's completely reasonable for this to be new. I've interviewed a lot of men as part of the project more recently. And one of the things I asked them was, how'd you get into mountain biking? And they tell this great story about, riding with their mates at school and reading, MB UK when it was launched in 1986 and all this kind of stuff. And it was great. And at some point I'll say, so did you have any girls? Do you have any friends who are girls who rode with? And it's always like, no, obviously not. And one of the guys that I interviewed put it absolutely beautifully. He said, did you question that? He's now a mountain bike coach, incredibly progressive, does everything he possibly can to create inclusive communities for women and marginalised genders and so on. And he said, well, no, I didn't notice it, because if all you were ever shown is yellow cars, you wouldn't ask why there were no blue cars. So it's invisible. It's really invisible. And so you're in a position where mountain biking is male dominated, mountain bike industry and cycling industry is male dominated as well. And it's actually the first challenge is becoming reflexive and thinking, actually, this is so. I'm not surprised that Brendan Fairclough had never noticed it. Why would he? Why would he notice it? It's not. So we don't notice it. And I always think, as a white person, how many times a day do I not notice what it's like being not white, person of color? I would never notice. It's completely different. So I think, the first thing we do is have conversations like this, where we ask ourselves difficult questions and we chip away at particular parts of that ecosystem. I think there is really, really good progress being made in ride leadership and in tutoring and in communities. And I think events and races are really far behind. And I've got a real bee in my bonnet about events and races this year. So I want to try and have a bit more of a conversation with race organisers and see what we can come up with collectively.
And it is really hard, isn't it? And I literally have this conversation time and time again. It's like it's chicken and egg. It's like whether you don't have the entrance, you don't have women, you don't have enough. You're saying you don't have enough to have women in separate categories, but you're not showing them that that's a possibility, and therefore they're not going to, but maybe not enter. And it is about saying, well, you always sell out. Could you hold back spaces for women? You know, if I've got to sort out childcare or try and, you know, a lot of women will wait till their friends sign up to something.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's about understanding and helping race organisers understand women's point of view, but also how to reduce the risk. So if you're a race organiser with a very, very limited margin, you don't want to take a risk. That's completely understandable and totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's got to be, again, a kind of a set of tried and tested mechanisms. I don't want to use the word toolkit again. Tried and tested mechanisms to enable race organisers to take that step and hold back, a quota for women entrants, or take, in a way that reduces the risk. And again, we can learn a lot from gravel, because gravel's done, made huge strides in.
Yeah, and I can't remember which event it was. I saw something very recently where they're saying, right, for the first half an hour of practice, we're just going to allow the women on the track. I was like, wow, that's brilliant. I raced last year and it was so intimidating. If you'd had a little bit extra time just to get your nerves out the way and get down the track a little bit. And I think that's why it's going to be really useful, I think, with the things that you're coming up with, is concrete things to suggest, rather than just sort of going to race organisers and going, oh, you're just not doing enough. Well,
amazingly, I get one of the comments I get a lot, and try not to spit your chips out at this point, Zoe, but a lot of the comments I get are, well, enduro is just too hard for women, that's why they don't enter it.
What?
And we try not to dwell on that comment, and then I say, well, the Highland Trail 550 is pretty hard, I'd say, and that has an incredible gender split, and because of proactive effort, right? Because of supporting women, showcasing them, raising the visibility, making a massive song and dance about the women who've done the Highland Trail 550, and there you go, more women enter. Same with the Dragon's Back. I don't know if any of you are runners on the call, but the Dragon's Back is a 6-day absolutely horrific ultra fell running challenge along the Dragon's Back in Wales. It is brutal. It's pretty much an ultra marathon every day for 6 days, and they get a huge number of women enter, and they've subscribed to something called She Races. Yeah.
With Sophie set that up. She's amazing.
Which is a commitment to doing lots of things. And so I think, well, these are two of the hardest. I describe them as two of the hardest races in ever. And if they can do it, we can do it in a mountain bike enduro.
And it does, but it also shows at things like the Hope Enduro at Ford, and the days where there are women's events, like they sell out. I remember, I don't think Tim's on the call, but when they put out about Project Evolve, that was 3 years ago, that sold out. And I remember Tim talking at the time. I spoke to him at the event, and he said, "Oh, we're really worrying about this event, and do we let them have it?" Because basically we had exclusive use of Rev's bike park, and it was one of those days where you've got to get enough people, so then hopefully cover the uplift costs. And they went backwards and forwards with the organisers for that, with Vero and Becky and Sean, and he then couldn't believe how quickly it had sold out. And it's like having faith that these things, when they're done well, with integrity, not tokenistically, they do sell out. And so when they say women don't want to race, it's absolute rubbish. It's just, it has to be sort of within a very specific set of parameters. And it's a shame there are some women's events that aren't happening this year, that haven't been taken forward, like you're saying about marketing budgets and stuff. But it's a huge untapped market, I think, that is slightly different from the demographic. And when we were reframing MTB, sat with the head of marketing from Trek and Marion, and it was like, you've got this massive missed opportunity around storytelling, around people on their bikes. And yeah, I love watching the Matt Jones videos, but do you know what? I'm not just going to go and buy a bike because Matt Jones rides it. I'm more likely to go and buy a bike if I see someone that looks a bit like me and that rides a bit like me riding and telling that story and that, you know, that whole piece of it. And I was like, when was the last time you saw any marketing that was featured a woman in her 40s, 50s, or 60s?
Well, that's a whole
well, yeah, but it was just really interesting because he was like, well, we just want to sell bikes. It's like, well, probably not just going to keep selling bikes if we just keep putting out the same sort of media, right? You know.
But it's great that, so Kath, good. I'm just conscious two people have raised their hands, so I'll move on. But just it's great news that Kath Goody has been sponsored now.
Yeah.
And you know, she's Kath for president, I say. She's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just before we let people ask their questions, while we're still on the racing subject, I had a couple of points, I suppose. I mean, one was there was a campaign by someone on LinkedIn. Ian might be able to remind us the name of the person. End of last year, because British cycling reduced the number of women's categories or refused to introduce women's categories. I think it was in downhill or enduro. But I suppose the question I have for race organisers, not for you two, but you know, what I understand is you don't get many women entrants, but I don't see the downside of actually allowing them to have their own categories, even if there's only 2 or 3 people in each category. There's no real extra overhead for allowing people to have their own categories. So do you guys have any insight into that, or?
No, and at the moment, I'm, I struggle. I don't want to speak when I don't understand the situation. So
okay, fair enough.
One of the things we want to do with the MB Wales work is bring race organisers together and listen to them and really understand what it's like on the other side, and from a position of knowledge, then we can hopefully co-create something concrete that they can use to move forward. Well, I don't actually understand why you wouldn't do that at the moment, if I'm honest. So
yeah, neither do I.
Learning to do
but maybe there is a reason, but I'm skeptical personally. But and the other more positive thing, and it may be as a result of the work you've been doing with Beicio Cymru, but I noticed they were doing some races this year. They were having a sort of a women's sort of guided ride around the course before races, which just seemed really nice and a really nice way of doing it.
That is an example that crops up time and time again. It's really Zoe hit the nail on the head, really, saying that women's experiences turning up and being in male dominated spaces in sport specifically, but generally at all, is problematic. And I also think we've got this sort of political historical shadow cast over us that you can't possibly understand if you're not in that position. And sport has been a male-dominated space for generations, and it has been created as such. And so we're trying to unpick that. So women feel very differently to turning up to a male-dominated space. It's in sport, and it's deeply uncomfortable. It's deeply problematic. And it's not because there's one bloke being a wally on the uplift. It's not anything to do with individual behaviour. It's cultural, and it's really hard to explain. And that's partly what I want to do, is try and explain to people what that feels like, and use research to do so. And proactive effort is absolutely required to help women feel like they own and can own space in mountain biking. And one of the best practice things we've come across time and time again is women only practice runs. Holding back tickets is really important, because things like Ardrock sell out in 24 hours. Women are unlikely to buy a ticket in 24 hours if they haven't done the event before, because they just think about and engage with this kind of world in a really different way. They will look at footage on YouTube. They will read blogs. They will talk to their mates. They will think very carefully about whether they can imagine themselves there. And if they see footage of that event and there's no women in it, it will create massive amounts of doubt in their brain as to, I don't want to feel out of place, uncomfortable. I'm going to be on my back foot. I'm not going to be able to do this. People like me just don't do this. And it's going to cause problems. So anything where you can carve out, push back the tide, and let women just take their time to find their own space, whether that's buying a ticket in the first place, practice runs, you know, track walks, anything like that that gives them a chance to make it their own is positive. It's the same principle for the women-only communities.
And that's really hard to do, isn't it? If 6% of those people turning up are women, to make sure that you try and show, you know, in 50% of your marketing with women, you know, actually you've got to scroll through a lot of photos as a race organizer to try and find those pictures if you've only got 6%, you know. So it's not an easy job, and we know that it's not easy for them. And so I think the work obviously we're doing, Fiona, is so important. And just we're all chipping away.
We're all chipping away.
Jess has had his hand up the longest, but I can let Charlie come in first because she had her hand up, put her hand down, because probably thought the conversation moved on. So it hasn't. So Charlie, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, Jazz. It does actually relate to what Zoe and Fiona have just been saying, actually. So women buy differently. And until manufacturers and brands realise that, they're still going to have a problem. Women don't impulsively buy. Women are thinking about their kids' school uniform that they've got to buy because their kids have had a growth spurt. Women are thinking about the grocery shop that they've got to do. Women are thinking about all of these other things, and they're prioritising that over that new set of knee pads or that new bike or whatever it might be. So I feel very, very strongly what you're saying about giving women time. And the same thing exactly applies to race entries. Friends of mine recently, 2 female friends recently did the anti-freeze up in Coed Brennan, and they waited until each other had confirmed each other's participation before they both booked, because that's how women work. And just on another sort of slightly side note, I do my very best. The majority of customers that we have here are men. But I have a super strong female contingent that support what we're doing because I support them. And at every opportunity, I am shoving my daughter out the door to go and ride if there's space on the uplift, because I think it's so important that people see women riding, see girls riding, and she rides the socks off 95% of our customers here. And it makes me so goddamn proud that, and my boys ride well too, but it's the fact, it sounds awful, it's better that she rides well to me in front of customers than the boys, because the boys naturally they're a bit more showboaty, and they get, oh, your lad's a little shredders. Yeah, but have you seen Hattie ride? Have you actually seen her? Because she's pretty good too. And I try to make sure that photos that I'm putting out on our social media, both as Havre Trails and also my own socials, equally feature a Hattie as well as the boys. And actually, I think I'm probably a little bit the other way, because I put all of my women's rides on there, all of the women's specific stuff that I organise. But as both Zoe and Fee have said, it's a slow kind of chipping away process, but that also applies to how women buy. So thank you. Sorry, Jazz, I'll let you get on with what you wanted to say, but it just related directly to what Zoe and Fee were both saying.
Go on, Jess.
Yeah, no problem at all. Absolutely fine. Jez single traction. First thing first, Kotick, they do sponsor. They have quite a lot of women ambassadors.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
And they did recently have a talk at I can't remember what the lady did, but she'd gone somewhere, and they do quite a lot for.
No. Sorry, I completely agree with you. They've been really supportive of this project. It was just I was about to say that they weren't. I was just focusing on their sustainability as an example. But no, Kotick have been really, really involved in pretty much everything we've done in FIAS.
Yeah.
They're huge supporters of what we're doing. So I wasn't for the record, I was not saying that.
So I'm a Kotick rider, so I've got to defend them.
Absolutely, I'm a big fan.
But no, it's interesting what you say, because I sort of, I mean, I've been riding for 25 years, and I used to guide, and I had 50% women at one time, but it definitely was that you need, if they didn't see another woman on the ride, they really wouldn't book. I also used to find that they were generally way better riders than their confidence level. They would always be questioning whether they'd be capable. You get blokes turn up, they'll just turn up and just, oh, I can do it. And they're absolutely hopeless. I've had to push them back, feed them Jello Babe. Never had to do that with a woman at all. But I can see the difference. You know what I mean? They will just generally be less confident and always feel like they're they're holding the group up. And even if you explain it's not, it's a social ride. It's very, very difficult to get that feeling of comfortableness. And possibly that's why I ended up getting up to 50%, because I tried to make people feel comfortable. But then everybody drifts off over time, you know, and then once you start to lose that group, unfortunately, it does drift off. But now, the social media thing, it just made me think about what you were saying. This weekend has been EDR and things like that. There's been on, and interestingly, my social media has definitely had a lot more women on it. But I think it's because I've been clicking on things, because like things like Ride Companion and various podcasts that Hattie Handon was on, and I found her fascinating. So suddenly she's been on my social media 4 or 5 times this weekend, and obviously she won, which was great. So I do think the social media thing is working slightly better, but you have to be proactive on it. But I was up at Glentress this weekend, and there was the cross-country racing there, and I have to say it was massively, massively male-dominated. All the kids, they're all blokes. But on the plus side, there were lots of families riding bikes, and it wasn't dad and son, it was the whole family. So I do think it does bode well for the future, because I'm seeing much more of that these days than you ever used to do. It was always dad and son, whereas I even saw there was a ride, and it was the son was younger, so and the daughter was older, and she said, I think my mum should go first, and they went first, which was great to see. You know, I mean, it was on the green route at the Glentress, but the kids were tiny, so it's absolutely brilliant that is moving forward. But I do agree with you that it is just a male dominated industry that needs to show more women, because I'm up at Hardmoors next month. I'm a marshal, so it will be interesting to see if it's changed, because I haven't done it for 4 or 5 years, to see what the number of women is. It'll be interesting to see if it's gone up. And a couple of years ago, I had a friend. She got herself on the Hard Rock. Now I marshal that a lot, and she sort of rang me up and said, I really don't know what I'm letting myself in for. Can you take me round? So we had a day up there, and I'm riding round, sort of say, well, I'll take you out because you can't. Well, you're not supposed to, because it's all on private land. But I know which ones you can and which ones you can't. So we went, and I took her on a ride that was roughly the right sort of distance, and took her down 2 or 3 of the things. And then we went and had a look at some of the others. And she said it was just fantastic, because she said she felt so much more comfortable. She knew what she was letting herself in for, and she knew how much more she had training she had to do to get to do the event, because we did 2 or 3 months beforehand. So I think you do need that. You do need that. I suppose really it's a safe space, isn't it, for ladies, because they just need that extra confidence.
I agree. I mean, I agree with most of that. I think it's.
Remember, I'm an old bloke. So.
I agree. I'm not disagreeing with you, and it's really interesting hearing your perspective. So thank you. I think it's dangerous to rely on words like it's it's a lack of confidence. I'm not disagreeing with you. It often is, and that's how it manifests. But the problem is not women.
No,
the problem is mountain bike culture. So I'm both agreeing with you and disagreeing with you in that sense. What I think your stories show so clearly is that women's participation and enjoyment of mountain biking, or lack of, if you speak statistically, is not inherent. It's not natural. It's not essential. It's created. We made it. We made a sports culture. Many sports culture. Not mountain biking is not particularly different to others in many ways. We made cultures in which women feel uncomfortable and lack confidence. And if we made them, we can unmake them. Yeah. And what you see through things you've done, but things that with a bit of understanding and knowledge and the right support, you can actually put really quite simple things in place, and be proactive and change things. And so I think that's what we're seeing more and more, is that when people understand that women's experiences are different, amazing things happen. And they will come, they will join in, and they will be, and they will change it for the better for everybody. I think, one of the interviews I did recently with somebody, and I said he's a man, but a real supporter of diversity in mountain biking in all senses. He's really interested in social class as well in mountain biking, and all sorts of different really interesting conversations. And I said, why are you so passionate about diversifying mountain biking? And he just said, it's just much more interesting.
Well, true. That is very, very true. Because the whole dynamic changes.
Yeah.
And it just feels more natural if you're on a weekend away and it's a mixed bunch.
Yeah.
But otherwise it becomes, it's a bunch of blokes, it gets laddie, it gets loud, and the testosterone gets going, and I don't like that. To be quite honest, there's always somebody then gets hurt.
Yes, of course. But it's nice to have the choice, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's nice to have the choice. Yeah.
On that point, I mean, if you take a step back, we talked about the media, which is obviously part of mountain biking culture, but obviously riding groups are another part of mountain biking culture. And like Jez, I felt the same way. Like if you move to a new area, and how long ago? I don't know. Let's say 8 years ago, I moved to Peaslake in Surrey, so I had to find a whole new set of riding groups. And it's intimidating for any newcomer to those sort of laddish groups. And if they've been established for a while, because that was the culture, that's the sort of established culture, they are very, laddish, for want of a better word, as you said, Jess. Like they, and they can be, intimidating for men. And I imagine they're even more intimidating if you're a woman or, from some other from a minority group. What can we do about that is a question, I suppose, to Fee and to everyone else.
I think as much as I run dig days. If there's any women there or girls, I always take pictures and make sure that they go on social media, because just the fact that if it's seen, it becomes more normal.
Yeah, but I suppose it's almost like obviously Fee's producing a toolkit for the media and for brands. Is there some sort of toolkit we can work on for? Because I don't think it's exclusionary. I mean, a good example I'd use is there's a riding group in Surrey called the Forest Chumps, who are the vast majority of them are tradesmen. They're white van men. They've got quite a lot of disposable income, but none of them have been to university. They sort of live in that sort of laddish culture. But actually, they can be welcoming. They're not doing it deliberately. Do you see what I mean? Like once you get to know them, and actually, I mean, Zoe will know about this. It's Russell's daughter. What's her name? Emmy.
Emmy Kosh, yeah.
Yeah, Emmy came to Rise and was made really welcome. But like the point is that from the outside looking in, if before you've been invited on a ride and come on a ride, you wouldn't know that they were going to be welcoming. Do you see what I mean?
I think actually the group you've just described was my first ever riding group. Not that particular one, but one in Bristol, where I was very much the only woman. I was definitely I was the only person who spoke like I do, shall we say. I didn't have a broad Bristolian accent, and they welcomed me with open arms, and it was great, mainly because I could keep up. So as long as you're fast enough, you're fine, kind of thing. But they were absolutely brilliant. We had such a good time. and it was great. So they was very inclusive. But I do think there's a difference between closed groups of mates and, you know, why should a closed group of friends include people that aren't their friends? I mean, I think that's completely, you know, reasonable. I think there's a difference between that and groups, community organisations that set up and go, we are going to set up a group for mountain bikers to come together who don't know each other, like Ride Bristol. You know, we have our Thursday rides, and that's where you've got an opportunity to intersect and say, right, if we're going to set up a group and make this a thing and have a monthly ride, a shop ride, whatever it is, then we've got an opportunity to make this as inclusive and diverse as possible. How do we do that? Because that's challenging, and that's what the community building toolkit does. So we set out a bunch of different stages and ideas for how you can make your, you know, open group diverse.
Yeah, for those of you on the call, I'm also in Bristol, so I've seen it close up, I suppose, that you know, how the Ride Bristol rides, both the women only rides, but also the Thursday night social rides, you know, have grown and developed. And it's amazing to watch, you know, like it's, you know, as Fee was talking about before, you know, how gravel culture is completely different because it was formed in a different time.
Yeah.
You know, actually setting up something new is actually a quite effective way of changing it. And I think there's a real opportunity for trade associations, you know, for their own benefit, you know, not even for inclusion benefits, you know, just for the benefit of growing their group and their community and their trail association and people volunteering, working on their trails. You know, that mechanism of having a social ride and you know, perhaps less frequently, but still doing, you know, women's only rides is really effective about building a really inclusive and positive culture.
So how we do it in Bristol, and again, unsurprisingly, it's been really proactive and really carefully considered. So we haven't sort of stumbled into having a trail association ride community. We've thought about it really carefully. And we do a number of things which have led to pretty decent numbers of women on the mixed ride. So we have a monthly women's ride that started first, and that was actually running for a year, pretty much a year before we decided that we should probably do a mixed ride as well. So that's one thing, and we proactively encourage, you know, badger the women from the women only ride to come to the mixed ride. It makes it easier for them to come because they're not led rides, they're social rides, but obviously you always have a kind of host, and many of us are actually trained ride leaders as well. And most of the people who, let's say, lead those rides are women. So there might be like 4 or 5 people who'll take a group off into the woods, and 3 of those on any Thursday night ride will be women. And it's normally if there's a bunch of ride leaders there at a Ride Bristol ride, somebody stands on a table and welcomes everybody and says what the plan is and which pub we're going to, and it will pretty much always be a woman who does that. So even though it could be a guy, it's like an unwritten rule that we'll just make that little comment, you know, that little sort of statement on the Ride Bristol rides and say, this is a safe space, this is a comfortable space for women. And that makes a massive difference. The other things we do are we don't know who's going to turn up. We don't expect people to book. We ask like who's coming, but we never know how many people are coming. And we've had anywhere between, you know, 10 and 87 was our largest ride, but that was because there was pizza. Fair enough.
There's a lesson there, right?
It was good on the solstice. We always say, no matter who turns up, we commit to there being a ride for beginners. And even if that's one person, there will be a ride for beginners. So you never need to worry that if you're, you know, on the fence and you're not sure, and there's all the chat on the WhatsApp group or the whatever it is saying, oh, I'm going to go off and shred these trails. Don't need to worry, because there's always a ride that would just do the blue trail and it'll be really chilled. And nobody ever gets dropped, and we commit to that both in the women's ride and the Ride Bristol ride. And the only conversation we have really between the ride leaders is who's taking the beginners ride, and then the rest of it we'll sort out on the night. And that's
just for everyone else's benefit, just to be a bit more explicit about that. So what tends to happen is depending on the number of people, there'll be a certain number of rides that set off at the same time.
Yeah.
So a beginner's one and an intermediate one, people that want to ride off piste, etc., etc. It'll vary depending on how many people turn up. But then everyone will come back together again at the end.
Yeah, and we all go to the pub, and we actively push the trail group as well. So we always talk about Ride Bristol at the beginning, and we say, you know, we're the only people that look after your trails, and please give us money, and please come to our dig days. And actually, you know, we're beginning to see a really lovely relationship between those community rides and there's those kind of you know, those social networks that we've built up through rides and the digs. And you know, there's a lovely moments on the women's ride where we, you know, I do my duty, I stand up at the beginning and I say I'm a trustee of Ride Bristol and these are Ride Bristol rides, and it'd be great to get some more women on the dig days. And then the women who've been to the dig days then start showing off about which bits of trail they dug and can we take the ride there and show everybody the bits that they dug, and it's absolutely wonderful to see. So it's really connected and interconnected, that kind of feeling part of mountain bike culture and feeling included, and then giving of yourself, giving your time, giving your money, giving your energy, and also buying stuff. It's all part of the same kind of ecosystem.
So Charlie, you lead women's only rides for Ride Bristol, which is quite a big group now in around all the trails of Bristol of riders, right?
Yeah, I do. So actually, I started. It was the other way around actually. So I've come from, my local was the Forest of Dean. I was kind of between Forest of Dean and Bristol, and I started off my riding career, if you like, riding with the Danes, with the Dane Forest Cycling, and an amazing and totally inspiring bunch of women. And I was like, we need that here, and no one else was going to do it, so I decided to go and kind of do it. And I started off organising just general rides for Brecfa, and it kind of sort of snowballed a little bit from there. So I've been doing the women's rides now for 18 months. I've got one on Saturday, actually, as it happens. This is my, I do them once a month. And they have just gone from strength to strength. It has been amazing to watch people who have openly admitted to stalking the group for a while just to know what they were signing up for and who they were likely to see and all the rest of it, through to the women that have just come along and just got it involved right from the beginning, through to people that are coming back from injury and literally and everything in between. What I am super keen to do, and I'm trying to kind of expand my networks to do this, is to encourage more girls into the sport. So girls that my daughter can ride with when she's in her kind of more into her teenage years. And so she comes out on every group ride, all of the women's group rides. And again, I try to kind of encourage other mums that have kids to come along and ride with us. Yeah, but it's tricky. It isn't easy. I have a kind of a core group of kind of 10 women that come to most of them, but it's hard work expanding that network. And there are so many barriers that are there, and we're just, as we were saying, just chip away at them slowly every time, but it takes time.
And have you noticed though, since you've been, I mean, obviously been running the women's ride for 18 months and actually involved in running the mixed rides for longer than that, have you noticed the proportion of women on the non-women's only rides grow over time? Or?
Okay, so this is something that I just had a very quick look at the beginning of the call when we were talking about kind of percentages of riders. When I joined the club, there was it's not a very big club. There's more people that go on the group rides than actually are members of the club, but that's fine. There was 2 women that were members of this group. I was one of them, and then there was another one that was a girlfriend of one of the committee members. So she was on the club, but she never ride, and I got her out last month. She came out for a ride, and we now have it's now 35% of our group is now women, and I I am going to blow my own trumpet. That is because of me. It's because I took the initiative to say, come on, girls, let's do it. My first ride, I had 3 of us on it, and then it's just kind of grown and grown and grown. But it does take time. And then Storm Dara comes along and closes the forest for 5 months, and yeah, things like, was it 5 months? Yeah, 5 months. And it just knocks you for 6, but you've just got to keep going. And I'm like genuinely really excited about Saturday. I love doing the women's rides. And yeah, it's great. And I don't dislike doing the pedal and a pint that we do, which is open to everyone. But I'm usually the only woman that goes on that usually. But it's, I don't know, there's a different dynamic when you've got women and just women. It's just different. I can't really kind of put my finger on why, but it's not unpleasant riding out with men. I don't dislike that. I tend to crash more when I'm riding with men. I don't know what that has to do with. There's any relationship with the fact, I don't know.
That.
I'm possibly a little bit more competitive. but yeah, that's my own problem, not anyone else's. So yeah.
But you're right. But you're so right, Charlie. Like we go to the women's rides. I run women's rides in Dorking, and for the International Women's Day, YT did a ride, and it wasn't exclusively women for International Women's Day. It was for men and women. And so my husband and the boys came along, and I don't think Paul had ever really been on a women's ride, not surprisingly. And he was like, "Oh my God, this is so different from how we ride." Like he hadn't grasped the difference.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh my God, all the weeping and the noise and the cheering and the encouragement." He said, "It's just so different from a guy's ride." And he's been riding way longer than me. And I was like, "That's really interesting, isn't it?" Because it hadn't occurred to me. Because obviously, as a woman doing this work, like you experience that magic and you get that. And I also think it is really important that women do then move on to non-women specific rides and feel then
100%.
comfortable in spaces, because otherwise it doesn't ever change. It doesn't.
Why shouldn't we be able
Yeah,
to do
exactly. We should be able to be in that space. But equally, if all we ever do, if my daughter only ever rides with girls, the teen lads never see her riding.
Yeah.
And so their perception of girls' rides and the ability that girls have is so out of line with actually girls' ability.
Yeah.
And so, but it very much takes it a little bit of time for you to build that confidence to go, actually, I am good enough to go on these rides, whereas a lot of the time the guys don't even question that, whereas like you're saying,
the whole yellow car, blue car thing. That's exactly it. Just because they don't know that they need us because we're awesome, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't know that. And I think that's really, really, really important. And it does come down to changing the women's mindset a little bit as well, to say, what, yeah, you've got this, you've totally got this, and encouraging that atmosphere in a group ride generally also goes a really, really long way. There's no reason why you can't incorporate that level of support and excitement. I'm buzzing for like a week after I've done a women's ride. It just gives me that kind of energy boost that I need to do. And I'm in the process of, this is super secret, so you can't tell anyone, but I'm in the process, it's gone on the internet, isn't it? Of organising a kind of a women's festiva takeover day, whatever you want for Have Our Trails. And I'm not banning men, but they have to come with a woman. That's the rules. And I think it is very important to reflect on showcasing what us women can do, and recognizing the fact that actually with you and your kids and your husband, they're part of your cycling journey as well. And I think actually a lot of women do like to ride with their partners or their male friends. So actually I don't think that should be discouraged, but I think it should be encouraged that the right atmosphere is available.
100%. And the women's takeover day at Forest Dean, it's open to everybody that day. We just want there to be loads of women, so that it's just that amazing vibe that we want to bottle is there. But also, if there are women out there who are like, I'd like to be part of this mountain biking thing that I've seen or I've heard of, but I don't know how to, and I'm not very good, and I don't have a bike, and I don't know where to start. You will be able to turn up on your own, and there will be social rides, and there will be training, and there will be coaching, and there will be lots of fun and a raffle and probably lots of cake, and it'll be amazing. And so yeah, that's exactly the kind of the point of the Women's Takeover Day in FOD as well, which I think is going to be a fun day out on the 21st of June.
So I was meant to be bringing it to a close really about 8 minutes ago, but I am going to carry on for a little bit because this is a really good stream of conversation. Zoe, I mean, have you got any insights? Because obviously you organise rides for people, people who've never mountain biked before, do you, as well?
Sort of, they need to have a mountain bike, right. Or we can obviously get hire bikes. There's lots of places, obviously, in Surrey that hire, but generally not total new beginners. We do occasionally run a green ride, but it's about having. Because we're all volunteers, it's hard to then give up your riding time to do that. So it's like Fiona says, you have to have a commitment of saying, right, this is what we're going to run, and we need every ride leader to step up and run one green ride a month. But it's really hard because we often find we don't have enough of them to run a ride. So then it's a bit weird when it's just you and one other person. You do need a little bit of a group to kind of make it kind of work a little bit. But we very much have blue rides and then pink and then black, and making sure that people know that there is progression if you want it, but if you just want to stick on the blues, that's absolutely fine. But occasionally we sort of drag people up and say, no, you're definitely able to go on the pink ride, because as you were saying, like, people tend to stick in those groups, or same with trail grading. A lot of women will go, oh no, I only do the blues, I don't do the reds. It's like, well, have you looked at the reds? And we'll go on YouTube and watch multiple videos of someone explaining what the drop looks like on YouTube. So when we originally started, we didn't grade our rides at all, and we found that people sort of progressed a bit more in that way. But then in order to try and streamline things, we grade the rides, because again, people like to know exactly what they're going to get, whereas on a very mixed ride, it was like you didn't know who was going to turn up, you didn't know their ability, and then did you have enough people to split off rides? So what we do sometimes do is have a blue/pink ride, and we split if we need to, or change which trails we're going to do, based on sort of ability.
But they're advertised in advance as one of those colour rides, basically. So you run one colour one week and a different colour the next week, type thing.
Well, we run 3 rides a week generally, and we run one a month on a Saturday that I run. So we have a good variety. But when it's a volunteer organisation, it's down to us relying on the volunteers and them giving up their time, their ride time. So it varies depending on people's commitments and childcare, and because again, not all the women that are involved have children, but a lot of the women that do have children. So then we find that stuff obviously tails off in the school holidays maybe, but then there might be more ad hoc rides rather than the exact regular ones. But we use an app that's really easy for people to see, oh, there's a new ride come up, I can go on that at short notice, rather than having to like plug it on social media a lot and be like, oh, there's this ride. And we do a lot with, so we last month my monthly ride was the same day as the YT women's ride, so we just tagged onto that. This weekend it's the Twisted Oaks ladies kind of day, so we've tagged onto that. So yeah, that's sort of how we do it. But obviously what's great about the toolkit that we worked on with Fiona is that there's lots of different ways that you can do these groups, and the toolkit's not prescriptive. It's not, right, this is how you do it. It's, these are the options, consider how you might want to run. And there's lots of different ways of doing it, and that's what's great about it. And there's some really clear ways of having some things in place to ensure that it does continue, because it's really, as Jez was saying, it can be quite fragile. You suddenly get a group of people and then it disappears. And actually it's about trying to make sure that all the effort that you put in is continued and doesn't just fall by the wayside when the one person that was organising it leaves, which is often how it is. If it's a shop ride and it's a token women's ride because they've got a women employee, when she moves on, you find that they drop off. So it's how you do it with that intention behind it, I think.
Yeah, really good point.
Cool. Well, look, I am going to bring it to an end there, unless anyone else has got anything they want to just add in that they haven't had a chance to say, or any questions they haven't had a chance to ask. It doesn't look like it. But look, Fiona, thank you so much. It's been brilliant. I got a lot out of it. Hopefully everyone on Paul got out of it. Hopefully everyone who watches on YouTube will get a lot out of it too. And thank you to everyone for your contributions. It's been brilliant. It's been a really, yeah, I've learned a lot certainly. But yeah, thank you all so much. Hopefully see you next month.
Yeah, see you soon.
Thanks Robin.